Jeremy Bentham. Let's start with the man who kicked it all off, Jeremy Bentham. Born in London in 1748, he was a true prodigy, reading Latin at age 3 and starting at Oxford University when he was just 12. He trained to be a lawyer, but he was horrified by what he saw. To him, the English legal system was a tangled, irrational mess that served the powerful and crushed ordinary people. He decided to dedicate his life to fixing it. So, he came up with a radical, simple idea to cut through all the confusion. He called it utilitarianism, and its core principle is something you've probably heard: the greatest happiness for the greatest number. What he meant was that the morality of any law or action, anything at all, should be judged by one simple test: does it increase pleasure and reduce pain? He even created something called the hedonic calculus, a sort of checklist to literally measure the amount of good an action would produce. This wasn't just a theory for a book, it was a weapon for reform. His ideas directly influenced changes in prisons, voting rights, and animal welfare, laying the essential foundation for a way of thinking that would change the world. John Stuart Mill. Now, if Bentham built the house of utilitarianism, our next thinker, John Stuart Mill, was the one who made it a home. Born in 1806, Mill's childhood was an intense experiment. His father, a friend of Bentham's, was determined to raise a genius who would carry on the utilitarian mission. Mill was learning Greek at age 3 and reading the great philosophers before he was a teenager. The experiment worked, but it came at a cost. In his early 20s, Mill suffered a severe mental health crisis. He realized that if he achieved all of his goals and made the world perfectly happy, he still wouldn't feel happy himself. Something was missing from Bentham's cold, calculating approach. This is where Mill's great contribution comes in. He argued that not all pleasures are created equal. There are higher pleasures like learning, creating art, and forming relationships, and lower pleasures of the body. In his most famous line, he said, "It's better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied." By introducing the idea of the quality of happiness, not just the quantity, Mill made utilitarianism more human, more sophisticated, and far more persuasive to the world. Henry Sidgwick. Our third philosopher, Henry Sidgwick, might be the most important one you've never heard of. He was a brilliant and deeply honest professor at Cambridge in the late 19th century. While Bentham was the fiery founder and Mill the passionate reformer, Sidgwick was the master architect, the one who stress-tested the entire theory to see if it could actually stand. In his 1874 masterpiece, The Methods of Ethics, he did something extraordinary. He took utilitarianism and put it in a philosophical cage match with its two biggest rivals: egoism, the idea that you should only pursue your own self-interest, and intuitionism, the idea that we just know what's right and wrong through moral rules. He analyzed each one with surgical precision, trying to find the single most rational way to live. While he ultimately concluded that utilitarianism was the strongest contender, his honest analysis revealed a deep problem he couldn't solve. He couldn't prove why a perfectly rational person should choose the happiness of the group over their own. This intellectual honesty and incredible rigor cemented utilitarianism as a serious academic force and set the stage for all modern ethical debates. Francis Hutcheson. Imagine coining one of the most famous phrases in philosophy only for someone else to get most of the credit. That's essentially the story of our next thinker, Francis Hutcheson. An Irish philosopher from the early 18th century, he was a key figure in the Scottish Enlightenment and a teacher to other giants like Adam Smith. Long before Bentham, Hutcheson was wrestling with what makes an action good, and in 1725 he wrote the line that would echo through history: "That action is best, which procures the greatest happiness for the greatest numbers." Sound familiar? But his approach was different from Bentham's cold calculation. Hutcheson believed we have a moral sense, almost like a set of emotional taste buds. We don't need a spreadsheet to know that kindness is good. We feel a natural sense of approval and warmth towards benevolent actions. For him, promoting happiness wasn't a chore, it was a natural human instinct. He's the crucial link, the one who took the general idea of goodness and officially tied it to public happiness, paving the way for the more systematic utilitarians who followed. William Godwin. Now let's meet the radical who took this idea of the greater good to its absolute and some would say terrifying extreme, William Godwin. A late 18th century anarchist thinker, he was part of a famous intellectual family, married to the feminist pioneer Mary Wollstonecraft and father to Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. Godwin believed that if we were going to be truly moral, we had to be ruthlessly impartial. He argued that our personal feelings, our loyalties, our love for our family, all of it means nothing when weighed against the total amount of good in the world. He presented a chilling thought experiment. Imagine a fire breaks out and you can only save one person, either your own mother or a brilliant archbishop whose life and work would benefit millions. Godwin argued you are morally obligated to save the archbishop. Your mother is just one person after all. This uncompromising logic showed everyone the potential dark side of utilitarianism. It forced us to ask a critical question. Is a moral system that demands we abandon our most human connections truly a moral system at all? Peter Singer. So far, we've been in the past. But what happens when you apply these 200-year-old ideas to the world we live in right now? You get Peter Singer, arguably the most influential and controversial living philosopher on the planet. An Australian professor at Princeton, Singer takes utilitarian logic and uses it to challenge the way we live our daily lives. He's most famous for two powerful arguments. First, in his book Animal Liberation, he argued that an animal's ability to suffer means its interests deserve equal consideration to our own. This launched the modern animal rights movement. Second, he forces us to confront global poverty. He asks, if you saw a child drowning in a shallow pond, you'd save them even if it ruined your expensive clothes. So why is it any different when a child is dying of a preventable disease halfway across the world and you could save them for the cost of a few coffees? Singer's work is the driving force behind the effective altruism movement, which uses data to figure out how we can do the most good possible with our time and money, making utilitarianism a practical and demanding challenge for the 21st century. Richard M. Hare. Let's be honest, defining happiness is almost impossible. It means different things to different people. This vagueness was a major problem for utilitarianism, and our next thinker, R.M. Hare, came up with a clever way to solve it. A professor at Oxford in the mid-20th century, Hare decided to shift the entire focus of the theory. He created what's known as preference utilitarianism. The idea is simple. Instead of trying to maximize a fuzzy feeling like happiness, we should focus on maximizing something we can actually track, people's preferences. In other words, the right thing to do is what gives the most people what they actually want. He argued this wasn't just his opinion, it was built into the logic of how we talk about morality. When you say something is wrong, you're not just stating a fact, you're prescribing a rule that you believe should apply to everyone in a similar situation. You're saying, I wouldn't want someone to do that to me. Hare's insight was to take this universal standpoint and apply it to everyone's preferences equally, providing a more logical and less subjective foundation for utilitarian thinking.
John Harsanyi would demonstrate the utility of utilitarianism using a different method. What if you could design a perfect society, but with a catch? You wouldn't know who you were going to be in it. That's the powerful idea behind the work of John Harsanyi, an economist who won a Nobel Prize for his work in game theory. He used this powerful background to offer a new and compelling defense of utilitarianism. He asks us to imagine ourselves behind a veil of ignorance. You don't know if you'll be born rich or poor, healthy or sick, part of the majority or a minority. From that position of total uncertainty, what rules would you choose for society? Harsanyi proved mathematically that a rational person wouldn't gamble on a system that creates a few super rich people and many poor ones, because you could end up poor. Instead, you choose the rules that create the highest average level of well-being for everyone. You're trying to make the average life as good as possible because the average life could be your life. It's a brilliant argument that uses pure self-interest to arrive at a conclusion that benefits everyone.
G.E. Moore, our next philosopher, looked at the work of Bentham and Mill and said, "You've all made a fundamental mistake." A leading Cambridge philosopher at the turn of the 20th century, Moore argued that trying to define good as pleasure is like trying to define the color yellow. You can point to a lemon and say it is yellow, but that doesn't tell you what the essence of yellow is. It's just yellow. Moore claimed that good is the same. It's a simple, basic, and undefinable property of the universe. He called the attempt to define it the naturalistic fallacy. So if we can't define good, what should we do? More's answer was ideal utilitarianism. He agreed we should try to maximize the amount of good in the world, but he argued that the good isn't just one thing. It's a rich combination of many things that are valuable in themselves, independent of any pleasure they bring. For More, a world filled with deep friendships, scientific knowledge, and the appreciation of beautiful art is an objectively better world. He dramatically expanded the goal of utilitarianism, from just making people feel good to filling the universe with what is truly good.
Derek Parfit, let me ask you a question that might keep you up at night. Which is better, a world with 1 billion incredibly happy people, or a different world with 100 billion people whose lives are just barely worth living? If you're a simple utilitarian, your answer has to be the second world, because the total amount of happiness is greater. This deeply unsettling idea is called the repugnant conclusion, and it was brought to us by our next thinker, Derek Parfit. Parfit was a legendary, almost mythical figure at Oxford University. He wasn't interested in simple answers. He was interested in the most difficult and mind-bending questions imaginable. In his masterpiece, Reasons and Persons, he explored the strange and paradoxical consequences of utilitarianism, especially when we think about future generations. He also fundamentally challenged our idea of who we are, arguing that a person is not a single continuous entity, but more like a chain of overlapping psychological states. This has huge implications. If you, in 10 years, is a slightly different person, maybe your first duty isn't to your future self, but to other people who exist right now. Parfit's genius wasn't in solving these problems, but in revealing them, forcing philosophy to confront the deepest, darkest puzzles at the heart of its own theories.
Epicurus. When you hear the word Epicurean today, you probably think of luxury food, fine wine, and decadent living. But the man himself, Epicurus, would have been horrified by that. An ancient Greek philosopher who lived around 300 BCE, he is a crucial ancestor of utilitarianism, but his idea of a good life was the exact opposite of a wild party. For Epicurus, the goal of life wasn't to chase intense, fleeting pleasures. It was to achieve a state of perfect tranquility he called ataraxia, a complete freedom from anxiety and pain. He taught that the best way to do this was to limit your desires to the simple, natural, and necessary. A little food when you're hungry, good friends to talk with, and freedom from fear are far more valuable than wealth or fame. The absence of pain, he argued, is a much more stable and satisfying pleasure than the pursuit of thrills. He was the first great thinker to place pleasure and pain at the absolute center of a good life. Later, utilitarians like Bentham would take this very personal philosophy and weaponize it, turning it from a guide for individual contentment into a powerful tool for social and political revolution.
David Hume. Our next thinker, David Hume, is the man who lit the fuse for the entire utilitarian project. A giant of the 18th century Scottish Enlightenment, Hume was a profound skeptic who delighted in tearing down old, unsupported ideas. And his biggest target was morality itself. For centuries, people had argued that morality came from God or from pure abstract reason. Hume said that's nonsense. He argued that morality is not something we discover with our brains, it's something we feel in our hearts. When we see someone act, we have a feeling of approval or disapproval. But why? Hume's brilliant insight was that we approve of actions that are useful or agreeable to people. We praise generosity because we see that it helps society and makes people's lives better. The word he used for this quality of being useful was utility. It was Hume who showed that our moral feelings are fundamentally tied to a concern for human well-being. Jeremy Bentham read Hume and had a famous aha moment. He realized if utility is the source of all our moral praise, then our single goal should be to maximize it. Hume was the detective who found the clue. Bentham was the one who solved the case.
James Mill. Behind many great thinkers, there's another great thinker pushing them forward. That's the story of James Mill. Father of the more famous John Stuart Mill, he was a Scottish historian, economist, and a close friend of Jeremy Bentham. While he wasn't as original a philosopher as the others on this list, his role in the utilitarian movement was absolutely vital. He was its chief strategist and its most passionate advocate. Think of him as the engine of the whole project. He worked tirelessly to simplify and promote Bentham's complex ideas, making them accessible to a wider audience. But his most significant and ambitious project was his own son. The intense experimental education he designed for John Stuart Mill was a deliberate attempt to forge a perfect utilitarian mind, a successor who could carry the torch for the next generation.
While we can debate the ethics of his methods, we can't deny the result. Without James Mill's fierce dedication, utilitarianism might have remained a niche theory that faded away with Bentham. He was the bridge that ensured its survival and evolution.
Now we meet the man who put utilitarianism on trial, Bernard Williams. A brilliant and sharp-witted British philosopher, Williams launched one of the most powerful critiques the theory has ever faced. He argued that the cold, impartial logic of utilitarianism is deeply and perhaps fatally out of touch with what it means to be a human being. His central argument is about integrity. Utilitarianism tells you to always do the action that produces the best overall consequences, no matter what. But what if that action forces you to betray your deepest personal convictions? Williams asks you to imagine being a lifelong pacifist who is told that if you kill one innocent person, you will save 19 others. A pure utilitarian would say you have to do it. It's simple math. But Williams argues that this demand is monstrous. It forces you to see your own moral identity, your integrity, as just one more disposable variable in a global calculation. It alienates you from your own life. His critique forces us to ask, what is the point of a moral theory that, in order to follow it, requires you to destroy the very person you are?
Philippa Foot, our final thinker, is famous for inventing a single, devastatingly simple problem that you have almost certainly heard of: the trolley problem. Philippa Foot, a pioneering philosopher at Oxford, didn't actually set out to explore utilitarianism. She was a founder of a rival theory called virtue ethics. But in 1967, she created a thought experiment that became the ultimate testing ground for utilitarian logic. Here it is. You are standing by a track. A runaway trolley is about to kill 5 people tied to it. You can pull a lever that will divert the trolley onto another track, where it will kill only 1 person. What do? The utilitarian answer seems obvious. Pull the lever. Saving 5 lives is better than saving 1. But then Foot and others after her introduced variations. What if you had to push a large person off a bridge to stop the trolley and save the 5? The math is the same, but for most people, the feeling is completely different. By creating this single, visceral scenario, Philippa Foot gave the world the perfect tool to expose the profound and uncomfortable clash between cold, rational calculation and our deepest moral intuitions.